Welcome back to the deep dive, where we take a stack of challenging material, research papers, intelligence reports, historical timelines, and we try to distill it all down to the pivotal moments that really changed everything.
Today, we are undertaking a pretty deep operational analysis of one of the most critical, yet I think least understood timelines in modern history.
Right,
We're looking at the morning of September 11, 2001.
right. And not just the attacks themselves, but the institutional collapse and, I guess, the immediate, almost improvised defense of the American air system.
Exactly.
I find the structure of this story just fascinating. We often talk about history in these grand forces, these slow trends, but sometimes everything, and I mean everything, hinges on a singular, high-pressure human choice. Think of history like a dam. The water rising behind it, that represents years, maybe decades. The slow, crushing buildup of geopolitical conflict, tension, and just structural vulnerabilities that lead to a crisis.
And that rising pressure was definitely palpable on 9/11. And the crack in the concrete that finally burst the dam, that happened in about 120 minutes. And it all centered around a single decision made in the Federal Aviation Administration Command Center in Herndon, Virginia.
That's our focus today. We're going to unpack the story of Ben Sliney. He was the FAA National Operations Manager, and he found himself sitting in the position of ultimate authority on his very first day on the job.
An unbelievable circumstance.
It really is. We want to understand how his snap decision, and this is a decision he technically lacked the formal authority to make, to ground every single aircraft, over 4,000 planes, was maybe the most effective defensive action of the entire day.
And critically, how that action created this sort of operational vacuum that was necessary for the total security structure we live with now to be, well, engineered from the ground up.
Right, from the TSA to the reinforced cockpit doors.
All of it. This is really the story of how institutional inertia was just completely overwhelmed by necessary instinct.
Okay, let's unpack this, and let's start with the world that existed right before 8:46 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. I think we have to grasp the fundamental, almost innocent assumptions that govern the American sky.
That's the perfect way to put it. Innocent. Before 9/11, the American sky was this paradigm of operational efficiency and, paradoxically, vulnerability.
A safe, high-speed, open highway.
A highway, exactly. It was resting on decades of just deeply ingrained trust. Trust between the government, the airlines, the flying public, and this trust, which was all about optimizing for speed and comfort, that was the core weakness the attackers exploited.
The system was built for commerce, not for conflict.
It was built for commerce and travel, not for kinetic conflict. Absolutely.
And the sources we looked at highlight two really fatal blind spots that illustrate this kind of structural naivete. The first one is the FAA's own operating procedure for hijackings. They call it the hostage model.
That's right. The official FAA playbook had been in place for decades. It treated a hijacking as really a routine criminal incident, a high-stakes hostage crisis.
So the goal was negotiation.
Negotiation and compliance. The primary goal was to secure the safety of the passengers and the crew by getting the plane on the ground safely, usually somewhere remote, and then you start a dialogue.
And the rules were pretty simple, right? Just yield, comply, and wait.
Exactly. Yield, comply, and wait for law enforcement or a military response, which, by the way, was expected to take hours, not minutes.
But the flaw in that, which seems so obvious now, is that if your goal is compliance, then the security of the plane itself is all about de-escalation, not defense.
Precisely. And the structure of the aircraft itself reflected that philosophy.
Yeah.
The cockpit was designed primarily as a workplace. It was not a fortress.
And the door?
The door was essentially a flimsy panel.
Sure.
Often made of lightweight composite materials. It was designed for privacy, sure, for acoustic separation from cabin noise, maybe to deter a casual intruder.
But not to stop a determined attacker.
No, never. It was never intended to withstand concerted force, let alone anything more. You could probably kick it or shoulder it open pretty easily.
So you have pilots who are trained to yield, and a plane that is physically built to be breached. They were assuming a threat that wanted to live to land the plane and make demands.
That tragic assumption that the hijacker was motivated by something negotiable, like, political asylum or money. It meant that when the attackers showed their real intention was to turn the plane into a terminal weapon, the entire defense system just vanished. Poof, instantly.
No one had ever conceived of the plane itself as the missile.
Not in any operational sense, no.
So if the FAA is operating on this assumption of negotiation, where was the military? Where was NORAD during all this? Which I think brings us to the second fatal blind spot.
And that's where the procedural gap just widens into a chasm. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, was, and still is, this magnificent, complex military architecture. But it was fundamentally designed to look outwards.
It was a Cold War machine.
It was absolutely a product of the Cold War.
They were scanning the horizon for the bombers that never came.
It's exactly right. Its really sophisticated radar systems were perpetually scanning across the North Pole, just waiting for external foreign Soviet threats. The entire command structure, the fighter jet bases, the alert procedures, it was all geared toward identifying a threat that started from outside U.S. airspace.
So, if a commercial flight takes off from Boston Logan and then suddenly just veers off course, how was that classified? What did NORAD see?
Well, they'd see it as an anomaly, an internal failure, or maybe a civilian air traffic control problem. It was not classified as a military threat.
So they weren't built to look inward?
Not at all.
Yeah.
NORAD was not built, nor was it trained, to look inward and track a domestic commercial flight that deliberately turns off its transponder and breaks civilian air traffic rules. The communication lines, the protocols between the FAA, which is civilian, and NORAD, which is military. They were slow, bureaucratic, and just completely inadequate for a real-time crisis.
So the core vulnerability was this vacuum of command. You had the FAA assuming compliance while NORAD was assuming an external threat. So when an internal threat broke the rules and refused to comply, there was functionally no authority capable of stopping it.
That structural fragility, that decade-long assumption of safety, is what made the immediate response on 9/11 so devastatingly paralyzed. The existing procedures just did not match the nature of the attack.
Which meant a gut decision was the only thing left.
It necessitated the gut decision that followed, yes.
Okay, let's shift our focus now to Herndon, Virginia, and the FAA Command Center. This is the nerve center where the entire crisis unfolded. Can you give us a sense of the environment in that room at, say, 8:30 a.m. that morning?
The command center in Herndon was the operational core of the entire American air system. It's a massive glass-walled room just surrounded by screens. So imagine the silence before the storm. You've got 4,500 planes, all represented by these little moving green data blocks, crisscrossing the country in perfect predicted harmony.
Just a normal Tuesday morning.
A normal Tuesday. The atmosphere was usually one of meticulous, controlled calm. And the job of the National Operations Manager, the position of ultimate operational authority, was just to maintain that flow, managing routine hiccups like weather delays or controller staffing issues.
And sitting in that chair was Ben Sliney. We really have to address this widely reported detail that it was his first day. The narrative of the rookie saving the day is powerful, but we need to put his actual experience into context here.
That narrative, while it's dramatically true, is also contextually misleading. It needs some precise clarification. It was absolutely his first day in this specific role of National Operations Manager. That chair holds immense operational responsibility.
But he wasn't a rookie.
Not at all. Sliney was an FAA veteran with decades of service. He started as an air traffic controller. He rose through various management positions. He knew the system's limits and its capabilities inside and out.
So the rookie designation applies purely to the specific bureaucratic box he was in that morning.
Exactly. The technicality was that he was still in the final stages of the bureaucratic certification process for that specific top-tier National Operations Manager role.
So the paperwork wasn't finished.
He was acting in the capacity, but the final box hadn't been checked. And this is crucial because it meant that when he issued the world-altering command, he was operating without the full formal mandate of the post. It was a clear risk of overstepping that a true bureaucrat would have avoided at all costs.
Wow. Okay, now let's talk about the initial shock. It's 8:46 a.m. American Airlines Flight 11 strikes the North Tower. Given that environment of routine professionalism you described, how did the first reports actually land in the command center?
They were almost universally categorized as a glitch or confusion, or a terrible, inexplicable accident involving a smaller plane, maybe a general aviation aircraft.
So not a commercial jet.
The system just couldn't process it. The atmosphere shifted from routine control to severe confusion, but not immediate panic. Controllers, who were deeply trained to trust their procedural manuals, they're reporting a fire, an impact, a loss of communication. But the system just could not conceive of a catastrophic event of that magnitude involving a commercial Boeing 767.
That delay born of disbelief that you mentioned from the sources is fascinating. It's the human element of bureaucracy, isn't it? When an event violates every rule you have, the system's default is to assume the data is wrong.
It's profound. The system was basically programmed to interpret an event without a procedure as a mistake, not as an attack. Sliney later recalled the disbelief was almost physical. They were looking at the monitors, getting these fragmented, agonizing reports, and just trying to reconcile the impossibility of it.
If the rules don't account for this, the rules must still be the priority.
That's the mindset. And this adherence to procedure, it cost precious minutes.
And while they were trying to categorize this first incident as a catastrophic accident, United Airlines Flight 175 was already well underway, also off course, also not responding. The pressure was just building so rapidly, turning that confusion into genuine operational alarm.
And the transition from alarm to catastrophic understanding happened at 9:03 a.m. That is the point of no return.
The second plane.
When United 175 struck the South Tower, broadcast live to the entire world, the entire FAA playbook instantly became irrelevant, obsolete.
The knowledge was instantaneous, right? This was not an accident. This was a coordinated military-style attack where the planes themselves were the weapons. What did that mean operationally for Sliney and his team in that room?
It meant that the number of potential threats had just ballooned from 4 known hijacked planes to nearly 4,500 unknowns.
Every plane in the sky.
Every plane was now a potential missile, and the immediate challenge was locating the invisible enemy, what some called the phantom sleet. This wasn't just a lack of information, it was a devastating overload of contradictory information.
This is where the technical detail of flight tracking becomes so important. How did the attackers actually make the planes invisible, and what does that mean for an air traffic controller on the ground?
So the hijackers turned off the aircraft transponders. Normally, a commercial plane transmits this highly detailed signal, a Mode C or Mode S transponder signal, and it identifies the aircraft, its altitude, its speed, its direction.
The little green block on the screen?
That bright, highly detailed block on the radar screen, exactly. When you switch the transponder off, the plane just stops broadcasting its identity.
And what's left on the radar? What do you see then?
What's left is just a primary radar return, a basic dot of reflected microwave energy, which could be anything. It could be weather, it could be a military jet, or it could be a commercial airliner. The controllers were forced to hunt for ghosts, just mere reflections that they had to manually try to correlate to known flight plans.
Assuming they could even keep track amidst the spiraling chaos.
Which is almost impossible.
That sounds absolutely paralyzing, especially when you combine it with the sheer volume of misinformation, the fog of war. What specific examples do the sources give about the bad data they were fighting?
Oh, the airwaves were just saturated. They had reports of a potential bomb on Delta Flight 1989, which was diverted to Cleveland. There was frantic chatter about a 747 heading toward Washington, D.C., which turned out to be a false sighting.
And wasn't there something about the Sears Tower?
Yes, reports about aircraft flying near sensitive nuclear sites or heading toward major landmarks like the Sears Tower in Chicago. For every real threat, the planes that were already confirmed or still hijacked, there were easily 10 phantoms, just born from miscommunications, from panic, from fragmented ground reports.
I have to ask, for Sliney in that room, how did they even begin to tell a genuine threat from a false report when they had no idea how many teams of hijackers were involved or what the ultimate targets were?
They couldn't, not with any certainty. And that's the core realization. A nuanced, targeted response like, say, grounding only planes departing from the East Coast, that was impossible because the chaos itself became the enemy.
So trying to analyze each specific threat meant risking paralysis.
Exactly. Grounding Delta 1989 might leave a hole open for another real threat they hadn't yet identified. The entire network was compromised, and they knew they were behind the attacker's operational timeline.
And the ultimate confirmation of this total threat came at 9:37 a.m.
American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon.
This event was crucial. It confirms that the threat wasn't just localized to New York, and that the civilian air system was being used to strike the very heart of the U.S. military command structure.
That's when the truth crystallized. Any plane could be a weapon, anywhere. The only way to find the needle, the 1 or 2 remaining hijacked planes, was to eliminate the entire possibility of the threat.
To burn the entire haystack.
You had to burn the entire haystack, neutralize the whole matrix by grounding everything. The attack on the Pentagon confirmed that decisive, systemic action was the only viable defense, and it overrode every existing procedural manual they had.
So by 9:37 a.m., the operational conclusion was inescapable. Every plane has to land now. But the authority to actually issue that order was incredibly difficult to get. And this takes us to the political and procedural near miss that really defines this whole morning.
Logically, grounding the entire country's airspace is an act that's reserved for an extreme national emergency, and the protocol governing it was known as katana.
Skatana. security control of air traffic and air navigation aids.
Yes.
It's often dismissed as just a Cold War relic. What specifically did it require, and what was its original purpose?
Skatana was a contingency plan, typically associated with a potential military invasion or a major nuclear alert. It was designed to instantly clear the skies of all civilian traffic.
So military planes could operate freely.
That was the purpose, to make sure nothing interfered with military aircraft fighter interceptors, maybe bombers on a nuclear alert mission. And the protocol required this complex, highly layered hierarchy. The military had to initiate the request, which then had to be escalated through the FAA administrator, Jane Garvey, and then ultimately approved by the Secretary of Transportation, Norman Mineta, or even the President.
So, on the morning of 9/11, where were these required decision makers? Why was the protocol functionally useless?
They were inaccessible or they were focused on their own immediate survival. Secretary Mineta was already being evacuated to the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEOC, beneath the White House, dealing with the fallout of the Pentagon attack.
And Administrator Garvey?
She was in transit. The chain of command was completely fractured, scattered by the very crisis it was supposed to manage. The system required multiple signatures and these complex bureaucratic permission slips that, in the fog of war, no one was available to sign.
And this is the moment where that near miss of psychology becomes so apparent. The stakes of Sliney's position were just terrifying. A by-the-book manager would have stalled.
That is the critical variable. A bureaucrat, rigorously trained to respect the chain of command, would have spent crucial minutes, maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour, trying to find Mineta, trying to get the Skatana Code authorized, trying to convene some formal committee.
They would have prioritized procedure over the immediate threat.
They would have prioritized guaranteed administrative stability over the possibility of making a mistake.
And the cost of that procedural delay, even 5 or 10 minutes, would have been devastating, primarily because of United Airlines Flight 93.
Precisely. Flight 93, the fourth hijacked plane, was still in the air. If that grounding order had been delayed, that plane would have continued on its flight path toward its presumed target in Washington, D.C., which was likely the Capitol or the White House.
So history pivoted on whether one man would choose instinct over an established but currently useless procedure.
That was the choice.
And Sliney chose necessity. He made the fulcrum decision at 9:42 a.m., just 5 minutes after the Pentagon was hit.
He cut right through the paralysis. He turned to his staff and he issued the command without any equivocation. He said, "That's it. I want them all down. Order all aircraft to land at the nearest airport." It was an order of operational magnitude that had never been given before. Not in peacetime, not in wartime, not in any crisis.
This was an unprecedented shutdown of the entire national airspace, a command that he, as a man still technically in training for the role, had no certified authority to issue. What happens right after he gives that order? Is there pushback in the room?
The reaction was described not as defiance, but as stunned, immediate acceptance. Everyone in that room understood the gravity of the decision, and more importantly, they understood the necessity. There was no time for political consultation.
The order was based on his gut.
The order was based entirely on Sliney's decades of experience, telling him that the alternative, continuing the status quo, guaranteed more destruction. He chose to absorb the massive administrative and economic risk to eliminate the immediate military threat.
So what does this all mean? It means the safety architecture of the next 2 decades was forged in those 120 minutes based on one man choosing decisive action over bureaucratic delay. Had he waited for the paperwork, Flight 93 likely succeeds and the chaos just continues.
It was a conscious choice to crash the world's most advanced air traffic system in a controlled manner, rather than allow the enemy to crash more planes in an uncontrolled manner.
The order is given at 9:42 a.m. Now we enter what is arguably the most logistically terrifying part of the story. The execution. It's one thing to yell, land 4,500 planes. It's a completely different thing to actually do it without causing a midair disaster.
The scale is just astronomical. We are talking about 4,500 civilian aircraft carrying maybe 500,000 people, all flying at different altitudes, different speeds, different fuel levels over the vastness of the continent, all instructed to basically pull over simultaneously.
And the system was designed for efficiency, for tight packing.
Exactly. It was optimized for minimum separation standards. So this wasn't just a threat from the hijackers anymore. The greatest operational risk in those next few hours was a self-inflicted catastrophe.
Midair collisions or just catastrophic pileups on runways.
Absolutely. Think of the controllers. Their entire training is predicated on maintaining safety separation. Now they're being asked to compress their entire airspace, bringing jets down simultaneously onto airports that were not ready for them. The risk of error was immense.
One mistake could turn a defensive maneuver into a new tragedy.
A new self-inflicted tragedy, yes.
The sources we have describe the controllers as becoming conductors of a frantic descending orchestra. How did they manage this without a systemic failure?
It was really a testament to their professionalism and to Sliney's clear, uncompromising command. The instruction to land now cut right through that fog of war. Controllers across the nation, operating in their own different sectors, had to triage the airspace in real time based on immediate factors: fuel status, remaining distance, the type of aircraft.
Can you give us some operational examples of that triage? What did that look like?
Well, they immediately prioritized heavy jets, the 747s and other wide bodies, because of their fuel loads and their potential threat profile. They aimed them toward the largest, most capable airports first. But capacity quickly became an issue.
They ran out of space.
They had to reroute planes to any open tarmac. Massive commercial jets were diverted to small, unprepared municipal airfields, places that had no customs clearance, no fueling capacity, and sometimes not even sufficient lighting for heavy landings. Pilots were ordered, sometimes against their own initial judgment, to land immediately, regardless of their destination or current flight status.
And what about the international dimension here? How did Canada, our closest neighbor, respond to this sudden influx?
Canada's response, which was known as Operation Yellow Ribbon, was a masterclass in international operational coordination.
Ooh.
NAV Canada, their air traffic authority, realized instantly that they were the closest safe harbor for hundreds of inbound flights, especially those coming from Europe.
So they just opened their doors.
They essentially opened up their entire airspace. Over 330 international flights carrying about 45,000 passengers were diverted and successfully landed in Canadian territory.
Gander, Newfoundland is the famous example of that, right?
Exactly. Gander Airport, a small airfield on the eastern tip of Newfoundland, received 38 wide-body aircraft alone. That's more than 6,700 passengers landing in a town of less than 10,000 people. It required immediate high-level coordination between the FAA and NAV Canada, ensuring that the 4,500 planes in the U.S. and the 330 in Canada didn't cross paths catastrophically during the descent.
And what about the pilots? They're up there, they're receiving fragmented news, and suddenly they're being told to land immediately at places they've never even heard of. How did they react to that?
The initial reaction was confusion, sometimes even resistance, as they didn't fully grasp the scale of the attack. But the controller's authority was absolute. The message was quickly distributed that this was a national emergency.
So once they understood, compliance was immediate.
Once the pilots understood that the planes themselves were the targets, the resistance just vanished. It was replaced by a frantic desire to comply and land safely. The risk profile had shifted entirely. The greatest danger was now staying airborne.
And then the culmination of all this, we track the timeline to 12:16 p.m. EDT.
Yes, the silence. By 12:16 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, just 2 hours and 34 minutes after the grounding order was issued, the miracle was complete. The national airspace of the United States was clear of all commercial and private flights.
The operational achievement there just cannot be overstated. They took the world's largest, most complex air system, and they put it to bed without a single self-inflicted crash.
And that silence, which lasted for about 2 days, that was the sound of the previous system dying. It was the necessary operational pause that allowed the nation to process the scale of the threat, and, crucially, it provided the foundation for the security changes that immediately followed.
The moment the skies fell silent, it became undeniably clear that the old system of trust was irrevocably broken. Sliney's command to clear the airspace was, functionally, an admission of institutional failure and a declaration that a total security overhaul was necessary.
And this is where we can apply the policy framework identified by researchers like Christopher Birkeland. The attacks of 9/11 were the quintessential focusing event. This is an event that is sudden, it's rare, it's highly visible and catastrophic, and it focuses the attention of policymakers and the public in such a way that it opens what's called a policy window.
Meaning that ideas that were previously considered way too expensive, too complex, or too invasive suddenly become politically achievable overnight.
Precisely. The 2 days of silence created the political and operational will for a total immediate overhaul. The key policy decision flowing from this was the complete obliteration of the existing airport security model. The old system relied on, poorly paid, minimally trained private security contractors. These were often high-turnover jobs treated as mere gatekeepers.
And in its place came the massive federal agency we now know as the Transportation Security Administration, or the TSA.
It was a tectonic shift. Congress acted with astonishing speed to create this massive centralized federal agency responsible for aviation security. And this meant the checkpoint transformed from a private company's liability into a hardened, federally controlled national border.
And now we accept things like removing our shoes, limits on liquids, extensive pat-downs, all as standard procedure.
All of it. All direct consequences flowing from that policy window opened by the 9/11 crisis and the subsequent grounding.
Beyond the checkpoint, the second, and I'd argue most critical physical consequence was the creation of the fortress cockpit.
The vulnerability exposed by those flimsy pre-9/11 cockpit doors was addressed with extreme prejudice. The replacements were reinforced, bullet-resistant doors with hardened locking systems and intrusion prevention protocols.
This wasn't just a minor upgrade.
No, these doors are designed to withstand small arms fire and specific levels of explosive force. They are functionally impervious to attacks from within the cabin.
And that represents a complete philosophical shift for the airline industry, doesn't it?
Yep.
The pilot is no longer a negotiator. The pilot is now the last line of defense, sealed away from the threat.
That is the ultimate symbolic and operational change. The concept of yielding to a hijacker is now impossible because the physical structure prevents access. The truss model was replaced entirely by the fortress model, ensuring that the aircraft itself can never again be seized and used as a guided missile launched from within.
And the third consequence is the most subtle, but maybe the most enduring, the new social contract with the flying public.
Yes. The lesson delivered by United Airlines Flight 93 was brutally clear. The passengers realized that the old contract, sit quietly, comply, and hope for negotiation, that was a death sentence. Their collective action on that flight, understanding that the plane was going to be used as a weapon, changed the paradigm forever.
So when the airspace reopened, the passengers themselves were psychologically part of the security system.
They were inducted into the new reality. They now accepted the delays, the intense scrutiny, the restrictions, because the alternative, the vulnerability of the pre-9/11 world, was just no longer a viable option.
The acceptance of federal screening was a national acknowledgement that the risk had been fundamentally internalized.
Right.
So the political science framework explains the why the TSA happened so fast, and the physical changes explain the how the planes were secured. It all traces back to that 2-day window of silence.
The political will for such massive, costly, and intrusive federal intervention was created by the operational void Sliney's grounding command produced. He created the space for policy to catch up to the reality of the threat.
We've traced the architecture of modern air travel right back to its origin point. A 120-minute crisis window and a single, non-procedural decision. The core insight remains that the complex, high-tech systems designed for control NORAD, SCATANA, FAA procedures, they all failed instantly.
The system, in its moment of greatest existential need, it proved brittle and ineffective. Sliney, the man who technically lacked full certification for his role, cut through all that bureaucratic noise. He chose to face the guaranteed enormous administrative fallout to prevent the possibility of even one more strike.
The safety of the skies was secured not by protocol, but by character.
Absolutely.
Let's revisit the alternate history, that near miss we avoided, one last time and to truly grasp the weight of his decision.
Imagine the bureaucratic manager who prioritizes the rulebook. He sees the chaos, he sees the Pentagon get hit at 9:37 a.m., and he begins the process of calling his superiors to authorize the Cold War's Katana plan.
And he's struggling to reach Secretary Mineta, who is deep in a secure bunker somewhere.
Exactly. He's wasting 30, maybe 40 minutes seeking the correct chain of command.
And in that hypothetical delay, Flight 93 reaches Washington, D.C. It causes potentially catastrophic political damage, and the Phantom Fleet reports could have included other real undiscovered threats, allowing the attackers to extend the chaos and the death toll across the entire afternoon.
The world we inhabit today, the world of TSA lines and fortress cockpits, it was not a foregone conclusion. It was a highly fragile, contingent outcome that hinged entirely on Sliney's willingness to give an order. He technically lacked the authority to issue an order that reset the entire security posture of a nation.
It's a stark reminder that the global aviation system, this marvel of interconnectedness and planned complexity, proved brittle in a matter of hours, broken by actors who just refused to play by the rules. We rely on these vast, complex infrastructures every day.
And their transformation often depends not on the protocols they enshrine, but on the character of the individual standing at the breach when those protocols fail. Ben Sliney chose decisive action, ensuring the crisis ended when it did.
This raises an important question. If our most complex mission-critical systems proved so fragile in 2001, what other turning points, decided in a fraction of a second by individuals acting on instinct outside of the established rules, have shaped our world recently without us even realizing the debt we owe them?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 120-minute pivot that grounded the American sky. We hope this knowledge helps you see the world of air travel and the decisions that underpin its safety in a completely new light.